Please accept this virgin bride." The rancher froze when she held his hand like she already knew him. The buckboard hit a rut, and she grabbed the side rail hard enough to leave marks in her palm. The driver did not apologize. He had not said a single word since they left the station at Cutter's Creek. And Clara Doyle had decided that was fine. She did not need conversation. She needed to survive the next 20 minutes without throwing up. The land around her was nothing like Pennsylvania. Back home there were trees so thick you could lose yourself in them, green and cool and forgiving. Here there was just open sky pressing down on flat brown earth, and the silence was the kind that made your ears ring. A hawk turned lazy circles somewhere overhead. Clara watched it because watching it was better than thinking about where she was going and why. The ranch came into view before she was ready for it. It was bigger than she expected. A main house built low and solid from dark timber, a long barn with a tin roof catching the afternoon sun, 3 smaller outbuildings, and a bunkhouse at the far edge of the yard. A windmill turned slowly near the water trough. 2 horses stood tied at the fence post near the house, both watching the buckboard come in like they were deciding something. Clara straightened her back. She smoothed her skirt with both hands. She had worn her best dress for this, a dark green wool that was already too hot for Texas in late spring, and now the collar was damp against her neck, and she could feel every single mile of the 2-day train ride in the bones of her back. The driver pulled up near the front porch and did not offer to help her down. She climbed down herself. A man came out of the barn. He was not what she had pictured from the letter. The letter had been short and practical, written in a hand that pressed hard into the paper. It said he needed a capable woman who was not afraid of work, that the ranch was in good order, that there was a small church in the nearest town, 12 miles east. It did not say much about the man himself. Clara had filled in the rest with her imagination, and her imagination had been wrong. He was tall in the way that seemed structural, like a load-bearing wall. Dusty from the barn. His hat was pushed back on his head, and his jaw was set with the kind of expression that was not quite a frown, but was nothing close to a welcome. He walked toward the buckboard with a particular kind of purpose. The unhurried certainty of a man on land he knew every inch of. He stopped about 6 feet from her. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment that stretched out longer than was comfortable. His name was Cole Hargrove, and he was 34 years old, and he had not been expecting someone like her. The agency letter had said Clara Doyle, 26, experienced housekeeper, healthy, willing to relocate. He had read it twice because he was a careful man, and then he had written back and said yes, he was interested. Yes, and the agency had sent a contract, and he had signed it and sent the fee. And that had been the end of his thinking about it. He had things to do. The spring calves were coming in hard this year, and 2 of his fence lines were down along the south pasture, and his cook had quit 3 weeks ago. And every morning was a negotiation with whatever he could find in the larder. He had not been thinking about what she would look like. She was not what he had pictured. She was smaller than he thought, though she was standing like she was trying to be bigger. Her hair was dark and pulled back with more discipline than success, pieces coming loose around her face from the ride. Her dress was wrong for the climate entirely, and she had to know that already. Her chin was up. Her hands were at her sides, fingers slightly curled, not quite fists. The posture of someone who was afraid but had decided not to show it. He respected that without meaning to. Cole took off his hat. Old habit. His mother had drilled manners into him before she died, and they had stuck. Cole Hargrove, he said. Clara Doyle, she said. Her voice was steady, and that surprised him more than it should have. You eat on the train? He said. She blinked. That was apparently not what she had expected him to say first. Not since this morning. He turned back toward the house. Come on, then. There's bread and some cold beans from last night. Not much, but it'll hold you. She did not move right away. He noticed because he was already halfway to the porch, and he had to slow without stopping to check. She was looking at the ranch. Not the house. The whole thing, the barn, the windmill, the horses, Austin, the stretch of land running out behind everything toward a low ridge of cedar in the distance. She was taking inventory, looking at it the way a person looks at something they are trying to decide about. He waited. She picked up her bag and followed him. The inside of the house was clean in the way that a man keeps things clean, which meant everything was where it needed to be and nowhere else. No rugs, no curtains. A good solid table with 4 chairs, a stone fireplace, a shelf of books that had been read, not displayed. The kitchen was to the left, and it smelled of coffee and iron, and something faintly smoky from the stove. Cole set a plate in front of her without ceremony. She sat down and ate without complaint. He watched her from the other side of the kitchen and felt something he could not name settle in his chest. It was not a good feeling exactly. More like a problem presenting itself before he had time to prepare for it. Outside one of his ranch hands, a young man named Pete Garza was crossing the yard toward the barn. Through the window, Cole could see Pete pause, look at the buckboard, look at the house, and then keep walking with a grin on his face that Cole was going to have to deal with later. The room is at the end of the hall, Cole said. Small, but it has a window. There are spare blankets in the chest. She looked up from her plate. Her eyes were brown and direct, and they did not flinch away when they met his, which most people's did eventually. Thank you, she said. Cole put his hat back on and went outside. He stood on the porch for a moment in the early evening light, looking at his land. I'm feeling the same wind that had been blowing across this part of Texas since before he was born. He had sent for a wife. He had done it the way he did everything, practical, without sentiment, because the ranch needed it, and he had long since stopped pretending that sentiment was something he had much left of. But there was a woman in his kitchen eating cold beans off his blue plate, and she had looked at his land the way he had looked at it the first time, like she was measuring whether she could love it. That was not what he had planned for. Inside, Clara set down her fork and pressed her palms flat against the table. She had made this choice with both eyes open. She had known exactly what she was getting into. An arrangement. A practical solution to a practical problem on both sides. She was not a girl who believed in fairy stories. But the house smelled like pine wood and old leather and something she could not identify that felt oddly familiar. Like a word you know, but cannot quite say. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself that twice. Somewhere out in the yard, she could hear a man whistling. The sound moved across the open ground and came through the window, and she sat there in the quiet of a kitchen she did not yet know, in a life she had not yet started, and listened. The morning came in hard and bright through the window, and Clara was already awake when it arrived. She had slept in her traveling clothes because unpacking felt like a commitment she was not ready to make at 9 o'clock the night before. Now, in the early light, she sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of the ranch waking up. Boots on the porch, on a horse moving in the corral, the far-off ring of something metal being struck. And she thought, this is the sound of someone else's life. She made herself stand up. She made herself unpack the bag. By the time she came out into the kitchen, Cole was already gone. There was a fire laid in the stove, but not yet lit, and a tin of coffee grounds on the counter, and a note on the table that said simply, "Water pump is at the side of the house. Back fence needs checking. Back by midday." She stood there looking at the note for a moment. Then she lit the stove. She had the kitchen fully cleaned and something reasonable organized for lunch by the time she heard boots on the porch. She wiped her hands on a cloth and turned to face the door, and it was not Cole. It was a boy, maybe 18, much with a face full of sun and a hat that was 2 sizes too big for his head. "Mom," he said, taking the hat off and holding it in both hands. "I'm Pete Garza. I work here. Mr. Hargrove said I should ask if you need anything from the supply shed." "I need a mop," she said, "and whatever you have for salt pork, if there is any." He nodded very seriously. "Yes, ma'am, I can do that." He went. He came back with a mop and a good hunk of salt pork, and also, without being asked, a small bunch of wildflowers, which he set on the table with the concentrated focus of someone trying to pretend they had not just done that. Clara looked at the flowers. She looked at Pete. "Thank you, Pete," she said. He went red from the collar to the hairline and got out of the kitchen faster than he had come in. She put the flowers in a tin cup of water and set them near the window. Cole came back at noon and stopped in the doorway. He looked at the kitchen, the clean counter, the pot on the stove, the flowers in the tin cup on the window ledge, and his face went through something she could not read, a sequence of small adjustments. "Pete," she said, before he could ask. "That sounds right," Cole said. He washed up at the basin and sat down at the table without being invited, because it was his table, and she set a bowl in front of him and sat down across from him, and they ate without saying much. It was not uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who were still figuring out how close to stand. After lunch, he pushed back his chair and said, "I'll show you the property line this afternoon if you want to know the shape of the place." She said yes before she had finished deciding to. They rode out together on 2 horses, hers a steady bay mare named Cora that Cole had described as forgiving of beginners, which Clara had not been entirely sure was a compliment. The land opened up around them as they went, wide grassland running to Cedar Ridge, a creek line to the north marked by a dark thread of cottonwood, the sky enormous overhead. Cole pointed things out. The south pasture where the calves were running, the fence line he had mended that morning, new wire still bright and stiff. A spot along the creek where the bank had collapsed and would need shoring before the summer rains. He did not talk for the sake of talking. Every word he said pointed at something real. She found she liked that. They were riding back along the north fence when Cora shied at something in the brush, a jackrabbit exploding out of nowhere. And Clara grabbed for the saddle horn, and her boot slipped from the stirrup, and for one sideways moment she thought she was going over. But Cora steadied fast, better mannered than the fright, and Clara got her seat back and let out a breath that was trying to be a laugh. Cole had pulled his horse alongside. He was watching her with his hands easy on the reins. "All right," he said. "Fine," she said. "Your horse has better nerves than I do." The corner of his mouth moved, just barely. "She's had practice." They rode back to the house with the late afternoon light slanting long and golden across the grass, when Clara noticed that the hawk was still turning circles somewhere high overhead, or maybe a different hawk, and she thought about how from up there the ranch must look very small. 2 people on horses moving across a piece of land that went on in every direction. That night after supper, Cole sat at the table with his account books, and Clara sat near the fireplace with the mending she had found in a basket by the door. There was a wool shirt of his with a torn sleeve, and she fixed it without asking and set it on the back of his chair, and he saw it when he got up for water and said nothing. But she caught him looking at the mended seam. The next morning, there was a second cup of coffee already poured when she came into the kitchen. She stood there looking at it, Cole was already at the table with his own cup and his account books, and he did not look up. She sat down and drank the coffee. On the fourth day, Cole's neighbor Frank Aldridge rode over. He was a broad, red-faced man with an easy laugh and too many opinions about other people's business. And he sat on the porch and had a cup of coffee and looked at Clara with a curiosity that was not quite polite. "So this is the arrangement," Frank said. Cole said, "Her name is Clara." Frank smiled at that, big and knowing. Cole's jaw did the thing where it set harder without moving. Clara refilled Frank's cup and said, "Mr. Aldridge, Cole tells me you run cattle on the east section. What do you do about the creek flooding in the spring?" Frank looked surprised, then pleased, then launched into a long explanation about drainage ditches that lasted through 2 more cups of coffee. When he rode away, he was still talking. Cole waited until the sound of Frank's horse had faded. Then he said, "You did that on purpose?" "I was genuinely curious," Clara said, and went inside. She heard him make a sound behind her that might have been a laugh. On the 5th day, they rode into town together for supplies. The town was small and looked like it had been built in a hurry and never quite finished. False fronts on the stores, a church that was really a house with a cross nailed above the door, a main street with more dust than boardwalk. People looked at them. Clara felt the looks and kept her chin level. At the general store, the owner's wife, a thin woman named Helen Briggs, came around the counter to look Clara over with the organized thoroughness of a woman assembling a verdict. "Cole Hargrove finally took himself a wife," Helen said. "Arrangement," Cole said. Helen looked at him. She looked at Clara. She smiled with her eyes in a way that said she was going to remember this conversation. Cole loaded the supplies into the wagon with an efficiency that suggested he wanted to be done and gone. Clara bought a paper of pins and a length of calico and did not feel the need to explain herself. Driving home with the supplies in the back and the sun going down in colors she did not yet have names for in this new landscape, Cole said abruptly, "The arrangement part. That was for them, not for me." Clara did not look at him. She watched the road. "What does that mean?" she said. It means I don't think of you as an arrangement," he said. "You're on my land and you're at my table, and that's enough for me to treat you right." She thought about that. "That's a decent thing to say," she said. "I'm not interested in being decent," he said. "I'm interested in being clear." The horses pulled them home through the blue, early evening, and the windmill was turning when they got back, and Pete was feeding the horses, and he waved at them from the corral. And Clara climbed down from the wagon and carried her calico inside and stood in the kitchen that was beginning to feel like her kitchen, and thought about a man who did not want to be decent. She thought that was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. Across the yard, Cole unhitched the horses and handed them to Pete, and looked at the house, on lamplight already warm in the kitchen window, and felt that nameless thing settle in his chest again. He was not a man given to worry about things he could not control, but this was beginning to feel like a thing he could not control. 3 weeks in, Clara understood the shape of the days. Cole was up before light. She heard him in the kitchen, the stove lit, boots on the porch, gone. By the time she came out, there was always coffee. That had not changed since the second morning, and she had stopped remarking on it internally, which was its own kind of progress or its own kind of danger depending on how you looked at it. The ranch ran on a strict order that Cole had built over years. Every task at its time, every person in their role. Pete did the horses and the light fencing. An older hand named Virgil Coates, quiet and methodical as a clock, worked the cattle with Cole from dawn to late afternoon. A third man, younger named Dale Marsh, came 3 days a week for heavy work and stayed clear of the house entirely, which Clara suspected was Cole's instruction. She had taken on the kitchen and the house and the kitchen garden, which had been running wild since whoever maintained it last. There was good soil under the weeds, dark and willing, and she went at it every morning before the heat set in, and by the end of the second week there were straight rows of beans and squash and 3 small tomato plants she had coaxed from seeds she found in a tin in the pantry. Cole had looked at the garden one morning from the porch and said nothing, but the next day there was a new hoe leaning against the garden fence, a better balanced than the old one she had been using. She understood by now that this was how he spoke. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday with the sound of a fast horse and a man she did not recognize pulling up hard in the yard. He was maybe 40, well dressed for this country, with a trimmed dark beard and the particular ease of a man who was accustomed to being owed things. He asked for Cole. Cole came out of the barn, and the 2 men stood in the yard and had a conversation that Clara could not hear from the kitchen window, but could read in the way Cole stood, feet set apart, arms loose, the posture that looked relaxed and was not. The man handed Cole a paper. Cole looked at it. He looked at the man. He handed it back. The man rode away. Cole came inside and sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the table for a moment before he looked up. "That was a man named Garrett Lowe," he said. "He owns land on the west side of my property line. Has been trying to buy the water rights on my North Creek for 2 years." "Did he make an offer?" Clara said. "He made a document," Cole said. "Says he has a county survey from 3 years back that puts the creek boundary line in his favor." "Is the survey right?" Cole was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. My father bought this land before I was born. The records I have are old." Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She sat down across from him. "Where do you keep your land papers?" He looked at her. "The original deed? The purchase records? Do you have them?" "In the box in the study." "Then we start there," she said. Then he looked at her for a moment with an expression she was not sure she could name. And then he got up and went to get the box. They spent 2 hours at the table with the papers. Clara had grown up reading documents in her father's office, who had been a lawyer before he died, and she had a careful eye and a patience for detail that Cole seemed to lack or to mask with stillness. She went through every page while he watched. The original deed was clear. The north boundary ran along the creek. The creek was his. "This survey Lowe showed you," she said. "Do you have a copy?" "No." "You need one. And you need to take this deed to the county office and have it registered again with the current date." She looked up at him. "Lowe is betting you don't know your own papers well enough to push back." Cole was quiet. "No, he may be right that I don't," he said. "He was right," she said. "He isn't anymore." Something moved across Cole's face too quickly to catch. He looked down at the deed in her hands and then back at her. "Where did you learn to read papers like that?" he said. She set the deed on the table and straightened the stack. "My father," she said. That was all she said. Cole did not push. That afternoon he rode to town. He came back before supper with a registered copy of the deed stamped by the county clerk and a look on his face that was not quite satisfaction, but was in the same neighborhood. "Clerk said Lowe filed his survey last month," Cole told her over supper. "Creek boundary is disputed now, but the original deed takes precedence until a court says otherwise." "Good," Clara said. "You know what a court proceeding out here costs," Cole said. "Yes," she said, "which is why Lowe is hoping you'll sell the water rights quietly before it gets there." Cole ate for a moment. "You figured that fast?" "My father had cases like this," she said. men with newer money and flexible surveyors. He looked at her across the table, and she met his look and held it. "Was your father a lawyer?" Cole said. "Yes," she said. "Before he was a man who owed money to the wrong people." She said it without flinching and did not explain it, and Cole did not ask. And that silence between them was a different kind of silence than the comfortable ones before it. More weight to it, more knowledge of each other in it. Pete knocked on the back door after supper to say that one of the calves was down in the south pasture. Cole was out of his chair before Pete finished the sentence. Clara put on her heavier boots without being asked and followed. The calf was young and struggling, and the mother was circling with a distress that was painful to watch. Cole went down in the grass beside the calf without hesitation, his hands moving with a certainty that came from having done this many times. And Clara held the lantern and handed him what he asked for, and kept her voice low, and even when he needed her to talk to the mother cow to hold her steady. It took an hour. The calf was on its feet at the end of it, uncertain and blinking, and the mother pressed her nose to it, and Cole stood up with grass and worse on his knees and his shirt, and he looked at the calf for a long moment. Pete was grinning. Clara was watching Cole. She saw the moment he let out the breath he had been holding. A small thing. Nobody would have noticed if they had not been looking for it. She was looking for it. Riding back in the dark, lantern swinging between them, Pete having run ahead. Cole said, "You didn't have to come out." "I know," she said. He did not say anything else, and she did not either. And when they got back to the house, he held Cora's bridle while Clara dismounted, and she thought it was a practical gesture, nothing more. And then she thought that she needed to be more careful about what she told herself was practical. The next morning, Cole was already at the table when she came out. He had the account books open, and the coffee was poured. And there was also, which had not happened before, a plate of biscuits. They were not good biscuits, and they were dense and slightly too brown on the bottom, and the edges had a determination to them that spoke of effort rather than skill. Clara sat down and ate one. "Good?" Cole said, not looking up from the accounts. "They're biscuits," she said. He turned a page. "That's a no." "That's a, you tried?" she said. He made a sound and wrote something in the accounts, and she ate another biscuit, and outside the windmill turned in the morning wind, and somewhere down by the creek a meadowlark was doing its best with the day. She thought, "I have been here 3 weeks." She thought, "I have been here a long time." That afternoon, Garrett Lowe sent a second man, younger, harder looking, who sat on a horse at the edge of the yard and did not come in and just looked at the place for a long while before riding away. Cole watched from the porch. He came inside and stood in the kitchen doorway. "He's measuring," Cole said. "Yes," she said. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." She turned from the stove. "I know." He looked at her in the way he sometimes did now, direct and searching, and something else she had not found a name for yet. "You're not scared," he said. "I am scared," she said. "I'm just more scared of the alternative." He was still for a moment. Then he said, "What's the alternative?" She held his look. "Leaving," she said. "And I'm not leaving." Cole said nothing. He nodded once, a small, definitive movement, and went back outside. Clara turned back to the stove and pressed her hand flat against the warm iron surface for a moment, just to feel something solid. Virgil Coates passed the kitchen window and tipped his hat without breaking stride. She thought, 3 weeks. She thought, I know the sound of his boots on the porch before I see him. She thought, I am in serious trouble. The letter came on a Wednesday, delivered by the stage driver who left it on the porch without knocking. Cole saw it when he came in from the south pasture. He stood on the porch and looked at the handwriting on the envelope, and his face went the way Clara had learned to watch for, the stillness that was not calm. He brought it inside and set it on the table without opening it. Clara set supper out, and they ate, and the letter sat between them like a third person. After supper, Cole opened it. He read it twice. She watched him read it the second time and knew before he told her that it was bad. "And my uncle," he said, "my father's brother. Says he has a note my father signed 20 years ago, a debt from when the ranch was first built. Says the note came to him when the original lender died." Cole set the letter down. "He's calling the note." "How much?" she said. He told her. Clara was quiet for a moment. The number was large. Not impossible, not if the spring cattle sale went well and the water rights dispute didn't cost him in legal fees, but large enough that the margin was thin, and thin margins had a way of getting thinner. "Is the note legitimate?" she said. "Don't know. Don't know if my father even signed it." "Where is your father now?" "Dead," Cole said. 8 years, Clara thought. "Do you have any of your father's correspondence, letters, business papers?" "Some. They're in the same box." They went through the box again. It took most of the evening, the lamp burning down, and Clara refilling it once without stopping her search. Cole sat across from her and went through his own stack, and neither of them talked much. She found it near the bottom. A letter from 22 years ago, from a man named Elias Crane, acknowledging a loan and listing terms. The terms did not match what Cole's uncle was claiming. The interest rate was different. The payoff conditions were different. "This is the original agreement," she said. "What your uncle sent you isn't a match." Cole looked at the letter. He looked at the one from his uncle. "He changed the terms," Cole said. "He changed the terms," she said. Cole sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling and let out a slow breath through his nose. Not anger, on something more deliberate than anger. "He knows I might not have this," Cole said. "Yes," she said. "He's counting on the distance and the years." "My father's brother," Cole said. It was not a question or a statement. It was a weight he was holding. Clara did not try to make it lighter. She let him hold it. After a while, Cole said, "I'll need a lawyer." "The county seat has 2, she said. "I heard it mentioned in town. One of them handled Frank Aldridge's property line case last spring." Cole looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Helen Briggs told me when I bought flour. She was not trying to be useful. She was trying to impress me with how much she knew about everyone." Cole almost smiled. "Did it work?" "It worked out for us," she said. He got up and went to the shelf and took down the bottle of whiskey he kept there and poured 2 small glasses and set one in front of her, and she looked at it and then picked it up because the evening seemed to call for it. He sat back down. "I'm going to ask you something," Cole said. She waited. "When you came here," he said, "what were you running from?" She held the glass in both hands. She looked at it. "My father's debts," she said. "Same as you, almost. Different people owed. Same result." Cole was quiet. "Pennsylvania?" he said. "Philadelphia," she said. "After he died, there was very little left. The agency was my option. This was my option." She looked up. "I knew what I was doing." "I know you did," he said. "I could tell that in the first 5 minutes." She thought about that. Now, what could you tell in the first 5 minutes? He turned his glass on the table. "Once. Twice. That you were counting things," he said. "The barn, the fence, the windmill. You were adding it up." "Yes," she said. "What did it add up to?" he said. She met his eyes across the table in the lamplight. with the 2 letters lying between them and the weight of 2 different old debts in the room. "Enough," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'll ride to the county seat Thursday," he said. "Talk to the lawyer." "Take the original letter," she said. "Both of them." He nodded. They sat there for a while longer in the quiet house, not needing to fill the space with anything more. Outside, the wind had come up, moving through the grass with a sound like water, and the lamp made the room a small, warm island. Clara thought about Philadelphia, the tall, narrow house with the leaking roof and the stack of bills on the desk, and the way the walls had seemed to close in after her father was gone. She thought about the train ride, 2 days of watching the land change from green to brown to open, not knowing what she was going toward, knowing only that she was going. She thought about Cole's face the first moment she had seen him come out of the barn. That immediate and complete impression of a person before you know anything about them, before they have said a word. Like a note struck once and resonating. She had told herself it did not mean anything. She was getting tired of telling herself things that were not true. Thursday morning, Cole was saddling his horse in the gray pre-dawn when Clara came out to the barn with a wrapped parcel. "My biscuits," she said. "Better than yours." He looked at the parcel. He looked at her. He took the parcel. "I'll be back by evening," he said. She nodded and watched him ride out, and the land swallowed him up in the early light. And she stood in the yard until she could not hear the hoofbeats anymore. Pete came out of the bunkhouse with his hat already on. "He'll be fine, ma'am," Pete said helpfully. "I know that," she said, and went inside to start the day. But she moved the wildflowers to the kitchen table where she could see them from the stove. Cole came back at dusk, later than he had said. Clara heard the horse from inside and was on the porch before she had made the decision to be there. He looked tired in the way that comes from the inside out, not the body kind, the other kind. And he unsaddled his own horse and walked to the porch and sat down on the step and took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "Sit down," he said. She sat beside him on the step. "Lawyer looked at both letters," Cole said. "Says the discrepancy in terms is clear enough that a judge would see it. The note is fraudulent or altered, which amounts to the same thing." He turned his hat in his hands. "But filing a challenge takes time and money, and my uncle is in Missouri. Jurisdiction is a question." "So it can be beaten," she said, "but not quickly." "Not quickly," he said. Virgil Coates crossed the yard with a quiet nod and went into the bunkhouse. A night bird started up somewhere in the cedar. "There's something else," Cole said. She waited. Lowe talked to the same lawyer last month. He's not just disputing the water rights. He wants the north section of the land outright. Cole looked out at the yard. "The lawyer thinks Lowe and my uncle are connected. Same investment group out of Dallas." Clara was still for a moment. "They're coming at you from 2 sides, she said. "Yes. One questions your land boundary, one questions your debt record, and together they squeeze." "Yes." She looked at the yard, at the windmill turning in the last of the light. "Who else knows the ranch this well?" she said. "Well enough to know what pressure points to push?" Cole was quiet for a long time. "My father had a foreman," he said finally. "Man named Chester Roy. Left about 10 years ago. Bad terms." "Would he talk to someone like Lowe?" "For money?" "Chester would talk to anyone." Clara nodded slowly. "Then they have a map of the place. If they know what you have and what you owe and where your papers are likely to be weak." "That's what I figure." "They expected you to fold," she said. Cole looked at her. "Most people would." You're not most people." He looked at her for a moment with that expression she still did not have a clean name for. Direct and careful, and something underneath that she felt in the sternum more than she saw in his face. "Neither are you," he said. She held that. "What did the lawyer recommend?" she said. "Get the water rights formally recorded with the original deed. File a counter to the note with the original terms. Get both on record before Lowe can make a court move." Cole paused. "It'll cost. Not a crippling amount, but enough." "Spring sale is when?" she said. 8 weeks. "Will the cattle bring enough?" "If prices hold," he said. "Virgil thinks they will. Virgil is usually right." She looked at the house. The lamp was burning in the kitchen window. "Then you have 8 weeks to hold," she said. "Keep the papers clean, keep the records clear, and don't let them spook you into a sale." "I've held this land for 8 years," he said. "I know how to hold." "I know you do," she said. They sat in the cooling evening, the steppe warm from the day's sun still stored in the wood. After a while, Cole said, without looking at her, "Why did you reach for my hand?" She went very still. He said, "First day, when you climbed down from the buckboard, you reached for my hand before I offered it." She remembered. She had not thought about it since, or she had been trying not to. "No, I don't know," she said. It was the truth, and it was not the whole truth, and they both knew it. Cole turned the hat once more in his hands. "It didn't feel like a stranger's reach," he said. "That's all I'm saying." She looked at the yard. She thought, "I have been here just over a month." She thought, "I know the sound of his breathing when he is reading, and it is something he finds difficult." She thought, "I know that he checks the calves at the south fence every single morning before he does anything else, and that he thinks no one notices." She thought, "I noticed. I think," she said carefully, "that some things don't need a long time." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "they don't." The night bird called again from the cedar. Somewhere Pete was laughing at something, a distant, happy sound from the bunkhouse. Cole stood up. He held out his hand, not to help her up, just held it out. She looked at it. She looked at him. She put her hand in his. They stood there in the porch, dark, the windmill turning, the stars coming on one by one above the Texas land. And neither of them said anything else, because nothing else was needed. Inside on the kitchen table, the wildflowers Pete had brought were still standing in their tin cup of water. They were beginning to look like they belonged there. In the morning, Cole rode out early, as always. But before he went, he stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment while Clara was at the stove, and said, "When this is settled, the land question and the note, I'd like to ride into town with you. For the church." She kept her eyes on the stove. "For the church," she said. "If you're willing," he said. Or she thought about a month ago, a train station in Pennsylvania, a bag in her hand, a letter in her pocket with the name Cole Hargrove, written in hard-pressing ink. She thought about the buckboard and the dust and the hawk turning circles over someone else's land, or what she had thought was someone else's land. She thought about a hand held out in the porch dark. "I'm willing," she said. He put on his hat and went out. Clara pressed her palm flat against the warm iron of the stove and listened to his boots cross the porch, and felt the way the house sounded different when he was in it versus when he was not. 8 weeks to hold. She could hold 8 weeks. She could hold a lot longer than that, if she was being honest. Which she had decided she was going to be from here on out. With herself about this. Outside, Pete was singing something tuneless and cheerful at the horses. Virgil Coates was already at the far pasture, a small figure moving in the morning light. The windmill turned. The beans in the garden were coming up straight and sure in their rows. Clara took the coffee off the stove and poured 2 cups. She set one at Cole's place at the table. She sat down with hers and looked at the window and the light coming through it. Golden and ordinary and entirely new, and thought that this was what it felt like to stop running. Not landing, not arriving. Just the simple, complete, irreversible act of staying.